Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how to use Dehancer within Final Cut Pro. In my opinion, if you want your footage to look like film, to kind of have that rich and tactile feel that a lot of Hollywood movies do, or to even look like it was shot out of a Super 8 camera, the best plugin to use is Dehancer. I have already created a separate video about Dehancer, kind of giving an overview of what the plugin does and what it's capable of, so if you'd like to learn more about the plugin, go ahead and check out the video down below. And if you want to get Dehancer for yourself and you decide to purchase it, go ahead and use my discount code CROSSWORK and that will get you 10% off of that purchase. It's also affiliate, so it does help both of us out. Alrighty, so here we are in Final Cut Pro. First off, I do want to say that Dehancer did give me access to their plugin so that I could try it out for myself, test it on some footage, and be able to use it on my own work, but to also inform you guys on how it works, what you can do with it, and that sort of thing. So that is what this video is about. So to start with, this is the shot that we will be working on today. This is after Dehancer, and then we have the flat profile version right here. So first, what we will do is we will go into our effects browser and we will drag Dehancer on top of our footage. You can also put it onto an adjustment layer, which sometimes I do prefer. Now, as you can see, this automatically goes to Rec 709. And one thing that caught me off guard is that normally if I had S-Log footage like I do here from my FX30, I would go into camera LUTs in the info panel and hit the S-Log version. And then if I did that, then I would just leave this at Rec 709. But what I can also do is if I took that off, then I can go into here and choose camera, and then I can go in through this way and create my Rec 709 render essentially. You do this for any camera that you have. Some of them are not on there, but most of them are. At the beginning here, we have our exposure compensation. Normally I leave that where it is, as well as temperature. Sometimes I change that later on. We also have tint, which is really helpful. And then we have these two difference settings here. I've heard that those change the chromatic aberration that sometimes happens in your high contrast highlight areas of your footage, but I have yet to utilize those tools. And now here is one of the coolest parts about Dehancer right off the bat, is all of these film stocks. And now these are film stock emulations, so they are emulating how this particular film stock in the real world emulated or rendered color and contrast and film grain and all of that. So we can go through and pick any one of these. There are a ton of options, and a lot of them just depend on the footage you have and the project you are working on. Let us go with whatever I had here in this other one. So we had Kodak Porta 160. So let's find that, Kodak Porta 160. And now this push and pull meter is basically changing how this film stock would look if it were exposed to different amounts of light. Some film stocks go more orange or more purple. This changes how this particular film stock is exposed to light. And now we go into this film developer window, and we have some contrast tools. And as you can see, this is not doing anything. This is a little bit of a beef that I do have with Dehancer, and you need to enable this button here in order for this window to work. Some of these windows are enabled by default and some are not. So sometimes I forget and waste time changing dials if I have forgotten to click that button. I will bring this up right now because there are other tools later that we can change. And then this gamma correction is also changing it's balancing out the corrections that you just made with the contrast boost. At least I think that's what it does. This color separation, I think basically does what it's supposed to, or what it says it does. As you can see, we get a little bit of color coming in here, so I'm going to bring this almost all the way down, but not quite. And then this color boost is basically your saturation, if all your saturation were in 1 meter. So I can bring this up, and as you can see, now we're getting a lot more life into our shot. And you can kind of see the color separation difference here. So I'll bring this almost all the way down. And now we go into film compression. And film compression, once it's enabled, you can see that the highlights here in like the window and the candle, the brightness goes down. And if you had a meter of like brightness exposure, here we are basically setting where this top floor is, or where the ceiling of the brightness can be. So it can be peaked, but it can be under the peak brightness. I don't know if that makes sense, but if we go in here, we can change how bright the brightest parts get. I will go around in here, and then this white is bringing that up a bit as well. If we go in and out, there's a small difference. And now with tonal range, I think that this is changing the effect of the previous two settings and affecting the overall change that you made over the whole image, and deciding how much of the image is affected by those. So let's go in here and do about that. And then color density is sort of like saturation, but I think what it's doing is sort of adding depth and density to your colors within your shot. Now if we go to the expand window, this is where I was talking, we can get a little bit more into contrast. We have a black point, which is nice, and I'll bring it around there. And then we have a white point, and bring it maybe right around here. And as color mode, we can leave at normal typically. Now if we go to print, print is basically, if you were happy with this image right now, we could print this figuratively into different types of print, which all also have their own look. I typically will leave this at linear and then adjust things from there. We have some exposure settings here as well. We have some tonal contrast, which acts a little bit differently than the contrast up here, contrast boost. But the tonal contrast is a little bit nicer, I find, to the footage than contrast boost. It sort of adds more contrast without like just pulling apart the highlights and the shadows. And saturation is almost always at full by default, so I typically will leave it there. And now that I'm looking at it, I may want to bring the black points up a little bit. And now color head is essentially the built-in color correcting feature within Dehancer. We can, if the image is too blue, again, we have to enable it. So that is my one big beef. I do wish that they were like up at the top and you could click them, or they were all not enabled by default and you would have to check one every time you went through. If we go into the color head, then we can make the image more warm or more blue, more green or magenta, and more cyan and red. And then if we press this gang button, then they all work as one control. And I do actually sort of like it pulled a little bit this way. And then we have our tones within the shadows, midtones, and highlights. So if the shadows we want to be a little bit more, warm, then we can do that. We can change the midtones to also match that closely. And then maybe we want the highlights a little bit cooler. Now this preserve exposure here does change a bit of the contrast. It's typically at 100, so we will leave it there. And then film grain, of course, is one of the favorite parts of people who like emulating film. It is enabled by default, but as you can see, it gets heavier when we go into like 8mm versus if we go to 65mm, it gets more fine. So typically and then we can go into custom and then really change it if we wanted to. So we could change the size of it, we could change the amount, and then it could look like you really don't know how to control your camera settings. But if we reset that, I'm going to go into custom from the 35mm setting and bring it down just a little bit. I don't want it to go super wild. And then bring down the midtones and the highlights. And then this film resolution feature is kind of cool because when you are applying noise to your footage, a lot of times the noise will sort of soften your shot. So this film resolution, if we go without, you can see that the screws here are kind of muddy looking, and then if we bring it up, it sort of reestablishes that definition or that resolution. We have positive and negative film. Positive typically looks a little more natural and it's a lighter effect. And then analog and digital is, we have analog, which is replicating what original film grain used to look like. And then digital is sort of an experimental, more artificial type of grain. I usually keep it at analog for myself. And then we have halation and bloom, which are one of my two favorite effects. If we zoom in here to this portion and we apply halation, you can see that it has added sort of the red fringing that happens near hot spots and highlights in footage. If we change it to Super 8, it is even more magnified. And if you have a hard time seeing what part of the image it is affecting, you can go into mask mode and you can see little tiny details back in here showing the brightest parts of the shot and which portions are being affected by the halation. So we can go in here. I want it maybe 16-ish. And then bloom is basically taking all of the white points within your footage and adding a halo or glow over them. It is different than halation, but we hit that, and again, let's zoom in so we can see the difference. It's a little bit too much. See the difference here. So keep an eye on this portion and this portion as I turn bloom on and off, and then on again and off. And for me, that really helps the image sort of blend together. And if I want even more bloom, I could go to Super 8, and then it starts having kind of a hazy look, which is nice. And then you can go into custom and change all of these factors, such as, you know, where all the brightness is coming from, or all the bloom is coming from, the detail, and there's a lot in here that you can kind of play around with. I'm going to reset it and enable it, and then change it to 16 or so. And then within film damage, that is basically replicating the little imperfections that would happen to the film strip before it was being shot or while it was being edited, where you would have little things that would get onto the film and then they would be there permanently within the footage. So if we enable that within the Super 8 setting, then we can see these little weird imperfections and stuff. And if we expand this and go to custom, we can see that we can change like the dust amount and the amount of hair, and it gets really wild and crazy. And it is fun if you are trying to emulate a particular camera look. I think for our purposes, I will reset it and enable it a tiny bit, but not very much. And then film breath is basically replicating the effect that film has, where it will change the color and brightness as it's going through the camera, and it's sort of a imperfect look, kind of like the film damage is. So if we enable that and we go to maybe Super 8, then we will see that difference better. But I will also say that as we've been adding all of these, I haven't played this back because it is very heavy on the machine. I have a 2024 M4 Mac Mini. Let me render this. But essentially, Dehancer is pretty heavy on your computer. especially when you start adding halation and bloom and film grain. It can really slow down your computer. All right, so now that it's rendered, we can see what film breath is doing, and you can kind of see the changes in brightness and color within the shot, and you can see a little bit of film damage as well. And then gate weave is sort of similar to breath, but it is the wiggle that happens from the film strip, either in the camera or on the projector. So we can enable that if we want. It has to zoom in order to have that wiggle room to adjust. So now, as you can see, it's sort of kind of wiggling around in the frame a little bit. And both with these effects, you can bring them into custom, and then you can change a lot more effects about them, such as how often they change their color and exposure and everything, how much of an exposure change, tonal contrast, and all of that. And then if we go to Overscan, this is where if you wanted to replicate what a Super 8 camera looked like, or one of the older cameras, we can enable that, and then it adds those borders across. And then we can change what type of cameras, like the Super 8 or Super 16 or Ultra Panavision. So it really depends on what you want, and if you want to go that extreme on this effect. And also with this, we have a lot of different options within here. I won't go that much into depth about these, but they all will change how that looks. And then we also have Vignette, which I will check off this box briefly. And this Vignette is great, but you kind of, in order to see what it's actually doing, you need to bring down the feather all the way so we have a clear circle, and then you can size it up, do what darkening you want, and then refeather it so that it's not darkening the whole image. And then what's cool also is that we have a monitor setting which allows you to see the false color settings within your shot. So maybe you would do this at the very beginning of your edit. That way you can get it exposed exactly how you want. And it has some clipping indication as well. And then if you really didn't like the look, let's say we wanted Overscan back on. Let's say you got this and then you're like, you know, I don't really want that much, but I don't want to go through and change everything again. You can go into output and sort of deplete this a little bit. Obviously the Overscan and some of those other heavier effects are going to look weird if they're half affected, but you can change it so that like the colors and everything are not as affected. And then also what's cool is that there's a LUT generator here. So if you got a look that you really enjoyed making and you spent a lot of time and you want to preserve that, then you can create a LUT from that. But what you should keep in mind is that that saves all of the Dehancer settings apart from the very top settings here, where you have the Rec. 709 settings. So what you'll need to do is when you bring your shot in, put your Rec. 709 LUT on there to correct that, and then you apply your Dehancer LUT, and that will bring you back to where you are. I may be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that's how that works. So in order to see the whole image, let's get rid of this Overscan mode and then render this and see how it looks. And now here's a clean preview of what we just did to our footage. And then this is a version of the same shot without any Dehancer applied, and is much more clean, and some could say it looks nicer, but I do feel like I can touch this. It has more texture to it, and it feels more real, and this was originally what the shot was going to look like. We changed some settings and it looks different, but it kind of gives you an overall feel for the difference that everything can make. So there you go. I do think that Dehancer is probably the best plugin that I've ever used, and it really works for any video, whether you want the film look or you just want a little bit of something to add some flavor to your shots. But that's about it. If you haven't already, please subscribe. It does help me out, and go ahead and like the video if you did enjoy it, and I will see you in the next one.